behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where tradition reigns supreme and every move is watched by millions, a deadly secret was about to surface. What started as preparations for the most anticipated royal wedding of the decade would end with shocking revelations that would shake the very foundation of the monarchy. Princess Anne, known for her sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty to the crown, noticed something others missed. A pattern, strange behavior, subtle changes that didn't add up. When she decided to investigate, she uncovered a web of deception so dangerous that it threatened not just one life, but the entire royal lineage. This is the true story of how a princess's determination to protect her family exposed a conspiracy that had been years in the making. A story of betrayal, courage, and the lengths people will go to protect those they love. What you're about to read will change everything you thought you knew about life inside the palace walls. The truth was hidden in plain sight, and Princess Anne was the only one brave enough to find it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Princess Anne walked briskly toward the main residence. At 73, she maintained the same purposeful stride that had characterized her entire life of royal duty. Today was different, though. Something felt wrong, and Anne had learned long ago to trust her instincts. The royal wedding was only 3 weeks away. Prince William's cousin, Lady Margaret Windsor, was set to marry the Duke of Northumberland in what the press was calling the wedding of the century. The bride-to-be was beloved by the public, known for her charitable work with children's hospitals and her genuine warmth. She represented everything the modern monarchy hoped to embody. Anne paused at the entrance to the castle's east wing, where the wedding planning committee had taken over an entire floor. Through the tall windows, she could see staff members rushing back and forth with fabric samples, flower arrangements, and endless lists. The energy was electric, but beneath it all, Anne sensed something darker lurking. "Your Royal Highness," greeted Mrs. Pemberton, the head of royal events. She was a woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and an efficiency that had managed countless royal occasions. "We weren't expecting you this morning. I wanted to check on the final preparations," Anne replied, her keen eyes scanning the organized chaos around them. "But everything seems to be progressing well." Mrs. Pemberton's smile was strained. "Yes, though we've had some last-minute changes to accommodate certain preferences from the Queen Consort." Anne's attention sharpened. Camilla had been inserting herself into every aspect of the wedding planning, claiming it was her duty as the senior female member of the royal family. While this was technically true, Anne found her involvement unusually intense, almost possessive. "What sort of changes?" Anne asked. "Well, she's insisted on overseeing the catering arrangements personally. She's brought in her own team of consultants and even changed some of the traditional menu items." In the separation, "She says she wants everything to be perfect for dear Margaret." Anne nodded thoughtfully. Camilla's sudden interest in catering seemed odd. The woman had never shown particular enthusiasm for food planning before, leaving such details to the capable palace staff who had managed royal events for decades. As they walked through the planning area, Anne noticed a young man in a dark suit standing near the catering station. He was tall and lean, with sharp features and watchful eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. When he noticed Anne looking at him, he quickly turned away. "Who is that gentleman?" Anne asked Mrs. Pemberton. "Oh, that's James Morrison. He's part of the Queen Consort's special security detail. He's been here quite frequently, ensuring all the food service protocols are properly followed." Anne found this explanation curious. Royal security was typically handled by the established palace guards and Scotland Yard specialists. The idea that Camilla needed her own security consultant for catering seemed excessive, even by royal standards. Later that afternoon, Anne found herself in the castle's library, a vast room lined with leather-bound books and illuminated by crystal chandeliers. She was supposedly reviewing guest lists, but her mind kept returning to the morning's observations. The unusual security arrangements, Camilla's intense involvement in the catering, and something else she couldn't quite put her finger on. Lady Margaret appeared in the doorway, radiant despite the stress of wedding planning. At 28, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that photographers loved, but it was her genuine kindness that truly set her apart. She had grown up knowing she would likely never be a working royal, which had given her the freedom to pursue her own path while maintaining her connection to the family. "Aunt Anne," Margaret said, settling into a chair across from her, I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to thank you for all your help with the arrangements. It's my pleasure, dear. How are you feeling about everything? Margaret's smile faltered slightly. Honestly, I feel like I'm losing control of my own wedding. The Queen Consort has been so kind, but she's changed nearly everything we originally planned. Even the menu for the reception dinner has been completely revised. Anne leaned forward with interest. Tell me about the menu changes. Well, originally we had chosen traditional English fare with some modern touches, but Camilla insisted we needed something more sophisticated. Team from London. They've created an entirely new menu, and she's been very secretive about the details. She says she wants it to be a surprise. This struck Anne as highly unusual. Royal weddings followed certain protocols, and surprises were generally discouraged in favor of tried and tested traditions. The idea that Camilla would completely overhaul the menu without consulting the bride seemed not just inappropriate, but suspicious. Have you met any of this catering team? Anne asked. Only briefly. There's this one man, Morrison, who seems to be in charge of everything. He's very professional, but there's something about him that makes me uncomfortable. He asks a lot of questions about dietary restrictions and allergies, which I suppose makes sense, but the way he asks feels invasive. Anne made a mental note of this detail. Professional caterers would indeed need to know about allergies and dietary restrictions, but they would typically handle such inquiries through established palace protocols, not direct questioning of the bride. That evening, Anne decided to take a walk through the castle grounds. The gardens were peaceful in the fading light, with only the sound of her footsteps on the gravel paths breaking the silence. As she rounded a corner near the service entrance, she noticed lights still on in the temporary catering facility that had been set up in one of the converted outbuildings. Moving closer, she could see figures moving about inside. Through a window, she observed Morrison speaking intently with two other men she didn't recognize. Their conversation appeared serious, almost secretive. One of the men was taking notes while Morrison gestured emphatically. Anne positioned herself where she could observe without being seen. The men seemed to be discussing something specific about containers or vessels. She caught fragments of conversation carried on the evening breeze, but nothing clear enough to understand fully. After about 10 minutes, the meeting broke up. Morrison and the other men exited through different doors, clearly taking care not to be seen together. Anne waited until they were well gone before approaching the building. The service entrance was locked, but Anne knew the castle's layout intimately from decades of living there. There was a side door that staff sometimes left unlocked for late-night deliveries. She tried the handle and found it turned easily. Inside, the catering facility was immaculate. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under fluorescent lights, and everything was organized with military precision. Anne moved carefully through the space, her trained eye taking in every detail. On one of the preparation tables, she found a folder left partially open. Inside were detailed floor plans of the reception hall, complete with seating charts and service routes. What caught her attention were the handwritten notes in the margins. Specific table numbers were circled, with cryptic abbreviations that meant nothing to her. Prefaces had dated notes about individual guests, dietary preferences, and medical conditions. This went far beyond normal catering requirements. Someone had compiled an extensive dossier on the wedding guests, including information that would typically be confidential. Anne photographed several pages with her phone, being careful to leave everything exactly as she found it. As she prepared to leave, she noticed something else that made her blood run cold. In a locked cabinet that hadn't been properly secured, she could see small bottles and containers. Even from a distance, they looked medical in nature rather than culinary. The labels were too small to read clearly, but their presence in a catering facility seemed highly inappropriate. Just as she was considering investigating further, she heard footsteps approaching from outside. Anne quickly made her way to the exit, slipping out just as she heard keys jingling at the main entrance. Back in her quarters that night, Anne studied the photographs she had taken. The detailed guest information troubled her deeply. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to compile personal data about every person who would be attending Margaret's wedding. The question was why. She considered her options carefully. If she was wrong about her suspicions, raising an alarm could cause unnecessary drama and potentially ruin Margaret's special day. But if she was right, and something sinister was being planned, Delay could be catastrophic. Anne decided she needed more information before taking action. She would need to investigate further, but carefully. Whatever was happening, she was certain that Camilla and her mysterious catering consultant Morrison were at the center of it. The next morning brought fresh concerns. Anne learned from Mrs. Pemberton that there had been additional last-minute changes to the wedding timeline. The reception dinner was being moved from the main dining hall to a smaller, more intimate venue. Camilla claimed this would create a better atmosphere, but Anne saw it for what it really was: better control over the environment and the guests. As Anne continued her investigation over the following days, she began to notice patterns that chilled her. Morrison appeared wherever the food preparation was being discussed. He had access to areas of the castle that should have been restricted. Most troubling of all, he seemed to have detailed knowledge about the personal lives and vulnerabilities of the wedding guests. Anne realized she was witnessing the careful orchestration of something far more dangerous than a wedding reception. The question that haunted her was what exactly they were planning and whether she could stop it before it was too late. The clock was ticking. With each passing day, the wedding drew closer, and whatever plan was in motion was approaching its final phase. Anne knew she would need help, but she also knew that the wrong move could expose her investigation and potentially put Margaret in even greater danger. As she fell asleep that night, Princess Anne made a decision. She would continue gathering evidence, but she would also begin preparing for the possibility that she might need to act decisively to protect her family. Whatever the cost to herself, she would not allow harm to come to those she loved. The game was in motion, and Anne was determined to win. Princess Anne woke before dawn, her mind already focused on the day ahead. 3 days had passed since her discovery in the catering facility, and she had spent every spare moment carefully investigating the suspicious activities surrounding Margaret's wedding. What she was uncovering painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Her first stop was the palace archives, a vast repository of records dating back centuries. As a senior member of the royal family, Anne had access to areas that were restricted to most others. She was looking for any information about James Morrison and the catering company that Camilla had so insistently brought in. The archives were kept in the castle's basement levels, accessible through a series of corridors that most visitors never saw. Anne made her way through the dimly lit passages, her footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The archival staff wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours, giving her time to search undisturbed. She located the personnel files and began searching for any record of Morrison. What she found was troubling. While he appeared in recent security clearance documents, there was no substantial background information. His employment history seemed to have been added to the system only weeks ago, coinciding exactly with Camilla's announcement of her special catering arrangements. Even more concerning was what Anne found when she cross-referenced the catering company. Sterling Events Management appeared to be a legitimate business, but when Anne dug deeper, she discovered it had only been incorporated 6 months ago. The company's listed address was a small office building in London that housed dozens of similar shell companies. Anne photographed the relevant documents, being careful to leave no trace of her investigation. As she prepared to leave the archives, she heard voices echoing from the corridor above. Checking her watch, she realized the archival staff was arriving earlier than usual. She quickly gathered her materials and made her way to an alternate exit that would take her directly to the garden level. As she climbed the stairs, she could hear Mrs. Pemberton's voice, apparently giving someone a tour of the castle's historical areas. "The archives contain some of our most precious records," Mrs. Pemberton was saying. "Of course, access is strictly controlled. Only senior family members and authorized researchers are permitted." Anne paused at the top of the stairs, listening carefully. She heard a second voice responding, one she recognized as Morrison's. "I'm particularly interested in the historical protocols for royal dining events," Morrison was saying. "Rotation helps us ensure that modern arrangements honor the past appropriately." This excuse sounded reasonable enough, but Anne found his presence in the archives deeply suspicious. Why would a catering consultant need access to historical records? And why was Mrs. Pemberton accommodating this request without proper authorization? Anne waited until their voices faded before emerging into the garden. She needed to think carefully about what she had learned. Morrison wasn't who he claimed to be, and the catering company appeared to be a front for something else. The question remained, what were they really planning? Later that morning, Anne decided to approach the investigation from a different angle. She contacted her friend Colonel James Hartford, a retired military intelligence officer who had served as a security consultant to the royal family on several occasions. If anyone could help her unravel this mystery discreetly, it was Hartford. They met at a small cafe in the village near Windsor Castle, a place where Anne could blend in with other local residents. Hartford was a distinguished man in his 60s, with sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. He had served with honor in various conflicts and had earned Anne's trust and respect over many years.
"Anne," Hartford said, settling into the chair across from her.
"You sounded concerned on the phone. What's troubling you?" Anne outlined her suspicions carefully, sharing the information she had gathered while being mindful not to jump to conclusions. But Hartford listened intently, asking occasional questions to clarify details.
"This Morrison character is definitely worth investigating," Hartford said when she finished.
"The timing is too convenient, and the lack of genuine background information is a red flag. Would you like me to run a proper check on him?" "Yes, but discreetly. If I'm wrong, I don't want to create unnecessary problems. But if you're right, we need to act quickly," Hartford finished. "I'll have preliminary information by this evening. In the meantime, I suggest you continue your observations but be extremely careful. If these people are planning something serious, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their operation." Anne spent the rest of the day maintaining her normal routine while keeping a careful eye on the wedding preparations. She noticed that Morrison seemed to be everywhere, inserting himself into decisions that should have been handled by established palace staff. More troubling was the way other staff members seemed to defer to him, as if he held some authority that wasn't officially recognized. During lunch, Anne had an opportunity to speak privately with Margaret. The bride-to-be was in the morning room, reviewing floral arrangements with the wedding coordinator. "Margaret, dear," Anne said after the coordinator had left, "I wanted to ask you about something. Have you noticed anything unusual about the catering arrangements?" Margaret looked up from the flower samples, her expression thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, yes. Yesterday I tried to visit the catering facility to sample some of the dishes, but Morrison told me it wasn't ready yet. He said they were still perfecting the recipes and didn't want to spoil the surprise. Did that seem reasonable to you?" "Not really. I mean, it's my wedding. Shouldn't I have some say in what's being served?" And when I asked Camilla about it, he just smiled and said I should trust her judgment. She was quite firm about it, actually. Anne felt her concern growing. "Has Morrison asked you any personal questions? About your health, your habits, anything that seemed inappropriate?" "Actually, yes. He asked very detailed questions about whether I have any food allergies or sensitivities. When I told him I don't, he seemed almost disappointed. Then he asked about other guests, whether I knew of anyone with specific dietary needs or health conditions." This confirmed Anne's suspicions that someone was gathering detailed information about the wedding guests, for reasons that had nothing to do with normal catering requirements.
"Margaret," Anne said carefully, "I need you to trust me on something."
"Don't eat or drink anything that hasn't been prepared by the regular palace kitchen staff until after the wedding. And if anyone offers you something special to try, politely decline." Margaret's eyes widened with concern. "Aunt Anne, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I'm not certain yet, but I'm investigating some irregularities. I promise I'll explain everything once I have more information. For now, please just be cautious." That evening, Anne met Hartford again, this time at his home in a quiet residential area outside London. The retired colonel's study was lined with books on military history and intelligence operations, a fitting environment for the serious conversation they were about to have. "I found some very interesting information about your Mr. Morrison," Hartford began, spreading several documents across his desk. "His real name is Michael Richardson, and he has quite a colorful past." Anne leaned forward to examine the documents. The photographs showed the same man she had seen at the castle, but the information Hartford had uncovered painted a very different picture than the professional catering consultant Morrison claimed to be. A chemist who lost his license 5 years ago after being caught selling experimental compounds to unauthorized buyers. Since then, he's worked for various organizations that operate in legal gray areas. His specialty appears to be creating substances that are difficult to detect in standard testing. Anne felt her blood run cold. "What kind of substances?" "According to my sources, he's known for developing compounds that can incapacitate people without leaving obvious traces. Some of his work has involved substances that can be mixed into food or drink and remain undetectable until it's too late. The implications were terrifying. Anne thought about all the prominent guests who would be attending Margaret's wedding. Political leaders, international dignitaries, members of the royal family. If someone wanted to target these individuals, a wedding reception would provide the perfect cover. There's more, Hartford continued. Richardson has been linked to a network that specializes in high-level political manipulation. They work for clients who want to influence or eliminate specific individuals without leaving fingerprints. Who would hire them for something like this, Anne asked. That's the million-pound question. But I have a theory. Someone with access to the highest levels of the royal family. Someone who could manipulate the wedding arrangements without raising suspicions. Anne knew he was thinking the same things she was. Camilla was the only person with both the authority and the access to orchestrate something like this. But what could possibly motivate her to attack members of her own family? Hartford showed her additional documents that revealed the scope of the operation. This isn't just about your family's wedding. According to my contacts, there's been chatter about a major operation targeting British leadership. The timing coincides perfectly with Margaret's wedding. Anne studied the intelligence reports, feeling increasingly sick as the picture became clear. Someone was planning to use Margaret's wedding as a cover for a massive attack on British leadership. The guest list included not just royal family members, but also the Prime Minister, several cabinet ministers, foreign ambassadors, and other high-ranking officials. We need to contact the authorities, Anne said. We do, but we need to be strategic about it. If we alert the wrong people, or if there are other conspirators we don't know about, the entire operation could simply relocate or target different victims. We need more evidence, and we need to identify everyone involved. Anne understood the dilemma. Acting too quickly could save some lives but allow the perpetrators to escape and try again. But waiting too long could result in a catastrophe that would devastate not just the royal family, but the entire British government. What do you recommend? She asked. We continue gathering intelligence for another day or two, but we also start preparing contingency plans. I have contacts in military intelligence who can be trusted completely, and when the time comes to act, we'll need their help. Anne returned to Windsor Castle late that night with her mind racing. She now knew that Margaret's wedding was being used as cover for something far more sinister than she had initially imagined. The challenge was stopping it without tipping off the conspirators or putting more people at risk. Division. As she walked through the castle's quiet corridors, Anne reflected on the weight of responsibility she was carrying. The safety of her family, of the government, and potentially of the monarchy itself might depend on her next decisions. She paused at Margaret's door, hearing soft music playing inside. Her niece was probably reviewing last-minute wedding details, excited about what should be the happiest day of her life. Margaret had no idea that her special day was being used as a weapon against everyone she loved. Anne made a silent promise that she would protect Margaret and all the other innocent people who were being targeted. Whatever it cost her personally, she would not allow this attack to succeed. But first, she needed to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy and identify everyone involved. Time was running out, and Anne knew that the next few days would determine whether she could save them all or whether she was already too late. The investigation was about to enter its most dangerous phase. Princess Anne stood in the shadows of the castle's east corridor at 4 a.m, watching as Morrison made his way toward the catering facility. She had been conducting surveillance for the past 2 days, mapping the patterns of movement and identifying the key players in what she now knew was a sophisticated conspiracy. After her meeting with Colonel Hartford, Anne had realized that traditional approaches wouldn't be sufficient to uncover the full scope of the plot. She needed to understand not just what was being planned, but who was ultimately behind it and how extensive the network really was. She followed Morrison at a distance, using her intimate knowledge of the castle's layout to stay hidden while keeping him in sight. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he was unobserved, making no effort to disguise his activities. At the catering facility, Morrison was met by 2 other individuals Anne didn't recognize. One was a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and professional attire that suggested she might be in a management role. The other was a younger man who carried himself with the alertness of someone with military or intelligence training. Anne positioned herself where she could observe their meeting through one of the facility's windows. The three individuals spread documents across a table and began what appeared to be a final planning session. Their body language suggested urgency and tension. From her vantage point, Anne could see that they were reviewing floor plans and what appeared to be a detailed timeline. The blonde woman pointed to specific locations on the plans, while Morrison took notes. The younger man consulted what looked like a list of names, occasionally making marks or annotations. Anne wished she could hear their conversation, but the distance and the building's construction made eavesdropping impossible. However, she could see enough to understand that they were finalizing the details of their operation. The wedding was now only 2 days away. After about 30 minutes, the meeting concluded. The three conspirators left separately, again taking different routes to avoid being seen together. Anne waited several minutes before approaching the facility. This time, she had come prepared. Colonel Hartford had provided her with some basic surveillance equipment, including a small camera and tools that would allow her to examine documents without leaving obvious traces of her presence. The facility was locked, but Anne had learned that Morrison's team had been careless about securing one of the service windows. She was able to gain entry without triggering any obvious security measures. Inside, the catering facility looked different than it had during her first visit. The equipment had been arranged to facilitate some kind of large-scale food preparation, but there were also elements that clearly had nothing to do with normal catering. She noticed several pieces of laboratory-grade equipment that would be used for precise measurement and mixing of chemical compounds. On the main preparation table, the conspirators had left some of their planning materials. Anne photographed everything quickly, being careful to capture both the documents and their arrangement so she could leave everything exactly as she found it. The documents revealed the true scope of the operation. What she discovered made her hands tremble as she held the camera. The attack wasn't just targeting the wedding reception, it was a multi-phase operation designed to eliminate key figures in the British government and royal family over several hours. The wedding reception was merely the opening move in a coordinated assault that would continue throughout the evening and into the following day. The detailed timeline showed that different groups of targets would be affected at different times. The initial wave would target the most senior government officials during the reception dinner. A second wave would target royal family members during the evening festivities. The final phase would eliminate any surviving leadership during what was supposed to be a private family gathering the following morning. Anne studied the target list with growing horror. Nearly every person of significant political or royal importance would be affected. The operation was designed to create a complete power vacuum at the highest levels of British society. But what truly shocked Anne was what she discovered about the methods being planned. The documents detailed a sophisticated poisoning scheme using compounds that would create different effects at different times. Some victims would become incapacitated during the reception. Others would appear to suffer heart attacks or strokes hours later. The plan was designed to look like a series of tragic but unrelated medical emergencies rather than a coordinated attack. As Anne continued photographing the materials, she found evidence of the extensive planning that had gone into the operation. The conspirators had detailed dossiers on every target, including information about their medical histories, personal habits, and security arrangements. They had been planning this attack for months, possibly years. Most disturbing of all was a communication log that revealed regular contact with someone identified only as Crown. The messages suggested that this individual was not just aware of the operation, but was actively directing it. Anne realized that the conspiracy reached into the very heart of the royal family itself. She was about to photograph the final set of documents when she heard a vehicle approaching outside. Anne quickly gathered her materials and made her way toward the window she had used to enter. As she climbed out, she could see headlights turning into the service area. Anne made it to cover just as Morrison and the blonde woman emerged from a van. They were carrying several cases that looked heavy and appeared to require careful handling. Anne watched as they unloaded their cargo and carried it into the facility. From her hiding place, Anne could see that the cases were marked with symbols she recognized as indicating hazardous chemical materials. The conspirators weren't just planning to poison the wedding reception. They had brought industrial-grade toxic compounds to ensure their plan's success. Anne waited until Morrison and his associate had finished their work and departed before making her way back to the castle. She needed to get the photographs to Colonel Hartford immediately, but she also needed to maintain the appearance of normal behavior until they were ready to act. The next morning, Anne attended the final dress rehearsal for the wedding ceremony. Margaret looked radiant in her practice dress, but Anne could see the stress and anxiety that the bride was trying to hide. The elaborate wedding preparations had taken their toll, and Margaret was clearly feeling overwhelmed by all the last-minute changes and complications. During a quiet moment, Anne approached Margaret's maid of honor, Sarah Wellington, a close friend who had known the bride since childhood. "Sarah," Anne said quietly, "I need to ask you to do something important, and I need you to trust me without asking questions." Sarah looked concerned but nodded. She was a sensible young woman who understood the seriousness in Anne's voice. "Tomorrow, during the reception, I need you to stay close to Margaret at all times. Don't let her eat or drink anything unless you've seen it come directly from the main kitchen staff. If anyone offers her something special, find a polite way to decline." "Is Margaret in danger?" Sarah asked. "I hope not, but I want to be certain. Can you do this for me?"
Of course.
"Should I tell Margaret?" "Not yet. I don't want to worry her unnecessarily. Just stay alert and trust your instincts." Anne spent the rest of the day making similar quiet arrangements with other trusted individuals. She couldn't prevent the reception from taking place without concrete proof of the conspiracy, but she could create a network of people who would be watching for anything unusual. That afternoon, Anne met with Colonel Hartford to review the evidence she had gathered. The photographs revealed the full scope of the plot and provided the concrete proof they needed to take action. "This is worse than we thought," Hartford said, studying the images on his laptop. "They're not just targeting your family. This is a complete decapitation strike against British leadership." "Who could be behind something like this?" Anne asked. Hartford was quiet for a long moment. "Based on the sophistication and the access required, this has to be a state-sponsored operation. Someone with enormous resources and high-level intelligence capabilities. But the communication logs suggest someone inside the royal family is involved." "Yes, and that's the most troubling aspect. The pack, someone with intimate access to the family, has been providing information and facilitating the operation." The palace became clear. Anne felt sick as the implications became clear. Someone she had known and trusted for years was actively working to destroy her family and her country. "We need to identify Crown," Anne said. "Until we know who that is, we can't be sure who to trust." Hartford nodded. "I've been analyzing the communication patterns. Based on the timing and the level of detail in the messages, Crown has to be someone with regular access to family schedules and high-level decision-making." Anne thought about the people who fit that description. The list was fortunately short, but it included individuals she had never suspected of any disloyalty. "There's something else," Hartford continued. "My contacts in intelligence have been monitoring unusual activity around London. There are indications that additional operatives have been positioned throughout the city. This operation extends far beyond what's planned for the wedding." Anne realized they were looking at something far more significant than an attack on a royal wedding. This was the opening move in what appeared to be a coup attempt designed to destabilize the entire British government. "What do you recommend?" she asked. "We need to alert the proper authorities, but we have to be extremely careful about who we trust. If there are other conspirators in positions of authority, a premature warning could compromise everything." "How long do we have?" "The wedding is tomorrow afternoon. Based on these documents, the first phase of the attack is scheduled to begin during the cocktail hour, about 2 hours before the reception dinner." Anne felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Less than 24 hours remained before the conspiracy would be set in motion. She had identified the plot and gathered evidence, but now came the most dangerous part: stopping it without alerting the conspirators or putting more people at risk. As she returned to Windsor Castle that evening, Anne made her final preparations. She had done everything she could to gather intelligence and build a case. Now she needed to decide how and when to act. The next day would determine not just the fate of Margaret's wedding, but potentially the future of the British monarchy and government. Anne knew that the decisions she made in the next few hours would be among the most important of her life. Looking up at the castle where she had spent so much of her life, Anne steeled herself for what was to come. Tomorrow she would either save her family and her country, or she would fail and watch everything she loved be destroyed. The final phase of the conspiracy was about to begin, and Anne was running out of time to stop it. Princess Anne woke at dawn on the day of Margaret's wedding. her mind sharp and focused despite having slept only a few hours. Today was the day she would either prevent a catastrophic attack or witness the destruction of everything she held dear. She had spent most of the night finalizing her plans with Colonel Hartford and making the difficult decision about when and how to act. The castle was already bustling with activity as final preparations for the wedding got underway. Florists, photographers, security personnel, and dozens of other vendors moved through the corridors with the organized chaos that characterized major royal events. To anyone watching, it appeared to be a perfectly normal wedding day. Anne dressed carefully, choosing clothing that would allow her to move quickly if necessary while maintaining her expected royal appearance. She concealed a small communication device that would allow her to stay in contact with Hartford and his team, who were positioned at strategic locations around the castle grounds. Her first stop was the main kitchen, where the regular palace staff was preparing the traditional wedding breakfast for the immediate family. Anne wanted to ensure that at least this meal would be safe, as it would be one of the last opportunities to eat anything that hadn't been compromised by Morrison's operation. "Mrs. Fletcher," Anne greeted the head cook, a stout woman who had been with the royal household for over 20 years. "Everything looks wonderful. I trust the preparations are proceeding smoothly?" "Yes, Your Royal Highness, though we've had some unusual requests from the special catering team. They've asked us to clear our afternoon schedule so they can have exclusive access to prepare the reception dinner." This confirmed what Anne had suspected. Morrison's team planned to take complete control of the food preparation process, ensuring that no one from the regular staff could observe or interfere with their activities. "I see. Well, I'm sure they know what they're doing," Anne said, maintaining a casual tone while making mental notes of every detail. Anne spent the morning moving through the castle, observing the final preparations while maintaining her normal role as a senior family member, helping with wedding arrangements. She noted the positions of Morrison's team members and identified several individuals she hadn't seen before who appeared to be additional operatives brought in for the operation. At 10 o'clock, Anne attended the traditional family gathering in the morning room, where Margaret was receiving final well wishes from her relatives. The bride looked beautiful but nervous, clearly feeling the pressure of the elaborate event that had grown far beyond her original vision. Camilla was there, playing the role of the supportive stepmother-in-law perfectly. She embraced Margaret warmly and spoke about how proud the family was to welcome her new husband into their circle. Watching Camilla's performance, Anne felt a mixture of disgust and admiration for the woman's acting ability.
"Margaret, dear," Camilla said, "I have a special surprise for you."
A catering team has prepared a traditional toast that will present just before the ceremony. It's something I arranged as a personal gift to mark this special day. Anne's blood ran cold. This wasn't part of the timeline she had observed in the conspiracy documents. It appeared that Camilla was improvising, possibly moving up the schedule to begin the attack earlier than originally planned. "That's so thoughtful," Margaret replied, genuinely touched by what she believed was a kind gesture. Anne knew she had to act immediately. The traditional toast was almost certainly the first delivery method for whatever poisonous compounds Morrison had prepared. If Margaret consumed it, she could become the first victim of the conspiracy. "Camilla," Anne interjected smoothly, "what a lovely idea." I was hoping we could discuss the timing of that toast. With all the photography scheduled before the ceremony, we want to make sure it doesn't interfere with the formal portraits. "Oh, I think we can work around the photography," Camilla replied, but Anne could see a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Perhaps we could review the timeline together," Anne suggested. "I have some concerns about the logistics." Anne successfully maneuvered Camilla away from Margaret and into a private conversation, buying time while she signaled for Sarah Wellington to stay close to the bride, that positioned herself where she could intercept any food or drink offered to Margaret. In the corridor outside the morning room, Anne confronted Camilla directly for the first time. "The toast can wait until the reception," Anne said firmly. "Margaret is already overwhelmed and we don't want to add more complications to the pre-ceremony schedule." Camilla's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of cold calculation that confirmed everything Anne suspected. "Of course," Camilla said, recovering her composure. "It'd be perfect for dear Margaret." Anne excused herself and immediately used her concealed communication device to contact Hartford. "They're moving ahead of schedule," she whispered. Camilla just tried to introduce a special toast before the ceremony. "I managed to delay it but they're adapting their plans. Guysing, understood. Hartford's voice crackled back. We're in position and ready to move on your signal. B. How much longer do you need? The ceremony starts in 2 hours. We need to let it proceed normally, but be ready to act the moment they try to serve anything at the reception. Anne knew that stopping the conspiracy too early would allow the key perpetrators to escape and potentially try again later, but she also knew that every minute of delay increased the risk that someone would be harmed. Picture 16. What appeared to be routine wedding coordination while actually implementing the security measures she and Hartford had planned. Key family members received subtle warnings to be cautious about food and drink. Trusted security personnel were positioned where they could observe Morrison's team. Emergency medical support was quietly moved into position. At noon, the wedding ceremony began in the castle's chapel. Anne took her place among the family members, watching as Margaret and her fiancé exchanged vows in a ceremony that should have been one of the happiest moments of their lives. The irony that this beautiful celebration was being used as cover for such evil made Anne's heart ache for the young couple. During the ceremony, Anne noticed that Morrison and several of his associates were not in attendance. They were undoubtedly making final preparations for the reception phase of their operation. Anne used this time to send final coordination messages to Hartford's team. The ceremony concluded without incident, and the wedding party moved to the reception area for cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. This was the period identified in the conspiracy documents as the beginning of the first attack phase, and positioned herself where she could observe both the catering stations and the key target individuals. She watched as Morrison's team began serving drinks and appetizers with professional efficiency. To casual observers, everything appeared perfectly normal. But Anne noticed subtle differences in how certain guests were being served. Some individuals received drinks from specific servers, while others were offered selections from particular trays. The targeting was beginning, but it was being conducted with such subtlety that most people had no idea they were being singled out. Anne saw the Prime Minister being offered a glass of champagne by one of Morrison's servers. She recognized this as one of the target scenarios from the documents she had photographed. Acting quickly, she approached the Prime Minister and engaged him in conversation, subtly intercepting the drink and placing it on a nearby table. "Prime Minister," Anne said warmly, "I was hoping to speak with you about the upcoming trade delegation visit." As they talked, Anne noticed that the server looked frustrated but couldn't make another attempt without drawing attention. She had successfully prevented the first targeted poisoning. Over the next 30 minutes, Anne continued moving through the reception, intercepting suspicious food and drink offerings while maintaining casual conversation with the targets. She managed to prevent several potential poisonings, but she knew she couldn't continue this approach indefinitely without being noticed by the conspirators. At 2:30 p.m., exactly on the schedule Anne had seen in the conspiracy documents, Morrison approached the microphone to make an announcement about the special dinner service that would begin shortly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison said with professional charm, "we're pleased to invite you to take your seats for a specially prepared meal that celebrates both traditional British cuisine and international flavors in honor of this wonderful union." Anne knew this was the moment. Was beginning, and she would have only minutes to act before the poison was distributed to dozens of victims simultaneously. She activated her communication device and spoke the predetermined code phrase, "The roses need immediate attention in the East Garden." Within seconds, Hartford's team moved into action. Plainclothes security officers who had been positioned throughout the reception area began converging on Morrison's team. Additional operatives moved to secure the catering facility and prevent the destruction of evidence. Morrison realized something was wrong when he saw uniformed officers entering the reception area. His professional demeanor vanished as he quickly scanned for escape routes. But Hartford had anticipated this, and Morrison found his path blocked by armed security personnel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Anne announced, taking control of the microphone, "I need to ask everyone to remain calm and stay where you are. We have identified a security concern that requires immediate attention." He erupted in confused murmurs as guests tried to understand what was happening. Margaret looked terrified, clearly fearing that her wedding had somehow gone horribly wrong. Anne watched as Morrison and his team were systematically apprehended. The blonde woman tried to reach for something in her jacket, but she was quickly subdued. The younger operative attempted to flee through a service entrance but was intercepted by Hartford himself. But even as the immediate threat was being neutralized, Anne knew that the most dangerous part of her mission was still ahead. She needed to identify and confront the person who had made all of this possible, the mysterious crown who had been directing the conspiracy from within the royal family itself. As security officers secured the catering area and began examining the prepared food for evidence of poisoning, Anne turned her attention to the family members and close associates who would have had the access and knowledge necessary to facilitate such an operation. The answer, when it came, would shock everyone present and change the royal family forever. But first, she needed to ensure that all the immediate threats had been neutralized and that the evidence of the conspiracy was properly preserved. The investigation was entering its final phase, and Anne was determined to see justice done for everyone who had been targeted by this elaborate plot. The wedding reception had become a crime scene, but Anne had succeeded in preventing what could have been the most devastating attack on British leadership in modern history. The reception hall at Windsor Castle had transformed from a scene of celebration into a carefully controlled investigation site. Princess Anne stood at the center of the chaos, coordinating with Colonel Hertford's security team, while trying to maintain some semblance of calm among the frightened wedding guests. Margaret sat in shock, still wearing her beautiful wedding dress, as she tried to process that her special day had been used as cover for an assassination plot. Morrison and his associates were now in custody, but Anne knew that the most crucial part of her investigation was just beginning. The mysterious crown who had orchestrated this conspiracy from within the royal family was still free, and until that person was identified and arrested, the threat remained active. Anne watched as forensics experts examined the food and beverages that had been prepared for the reception dinner. Their preliminary tests confirmed her worst fears. Multiple dishes had been contaminated with sophisticated poisonous compounds that would have caused delayed but fatal reactions in anyone who consumed them. "Your Royal Highness," Hertford approached her with a grim expression, "we've found enough toxic material to kill several hundred people. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was planned genocide of British leadership." Anne nodded, feeling the full weight of how close they had come to catastrophe. "What about the communication devices? Were you able to trace the source of the crown messages?" "That's what I need to discuss with you privately," Hertford said, glancing around at the other family members nearby. Anne followed Hertford to a small anteroom off the main reception hall. Once they were alone, Hertford pulled out a tablet computer displaying the results of his technical analysis. "We've been able to trace the communication signature," Hertford said. "The crown messages were sent from a device that was always within the castle grounds during the planning period. More specifically, they came from devices with access to the royal family's private communication network." Anne felt her stomach tighten. Only how that level of access? Fewer than a dozen. But there's more. We've analyzed the timing of the messages against the known schedules of potential suspects. Only 3 people could have sent all of the crown communications based on their documented whereabouts. Hertford showed Anne a chart displaying the correlation between message timestamps and the locations of various royal family members and senior staff. The 3 possibilities are the Queen Consort herself, Sir Robert Thornfield, who manages the royal household, and... Hertford paused, clearly uncomfortable with the final name on the list. "Who?" Anne demanded. "Lady Patricia Mountcastle, your brother's private secretary." Anne felt the blood drain from her face. Patricia had been part of the royal household for over 15 years. She had access to virtually every aspect of the family's private affairs and had been involved in planning countless royal events. If Patricia was the traitor, she would have been perfectly positioned to facilitate every aspect of the conspiracy. "We need to confront each of them systematically," Anne said, "but we need to be careful. If we alert the wrong person, they could destroy evidence or activate contingency plans we don't know about." Anne returned to the reception hall, where the guests were being interviewed by security personnel and gradually released. She needed to locate the 3 suspects and determine which one was crown, without tipping them off. She found Camilla first, sitting with Margaret and trying to comfort the traumatized bride. Camilla's performance as the concerned stepmother was flawless, but Anne now viewed every gesture with suspicion. "Camilla," Anne said, approaching carefully, "could I speak with you privately?" Breach could have occurred. Camilla looked up with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Of course, Anne. This is just terrible. Poor Margaret's wedding has been ruined." In a private sitting room, Anne decided to test Camilla directly. The investigation has revealed that someone with high-level access to our family's private information was feeding intelligence to the conspirators. Do you have any idea who might have had both the access and the motive to do such a thing? Camilla's reaction seemed genuinely puzzled. I can't imagine anyone in our inner circle being involved in something so horrible. Everyone who works closely with the family has been thoroughly vetted. Anne watched Camilla's body language carefully, looking for any signs of deception or hidden knowledge. While she couldn't rule Camilla out completely, her responses felt authentic rather than calculated. There is one thing, Camilla continued thoughtfully. About 3 months ago, I noticed that some of my private correspondence seemed to have been accessed. The personal letters that I was certain I had secured were found in slightly different positions. At the time, I assumed it was housekeeping staff. But now I wonder, this was new information that potentially pointed away from Camilla as the primary suspect. If she was Crown, she wouldn't need to steal her own correspondence. Anne's next target was Sir Robert Thornfield, who she found in his office reviewing security protocols with the palace guards. Robert was a distinguished man in his 60s who had managed royal household operations with impeccable efficiency for over 2 decades. Sir Robert, Anne said, I need to understand how the catering arrangements were approved. Can you walk me through the process that allowed Morrison's team to gain access to the castle? Robert consulted his files with characteristic precision. The request came through the Queen Consort's office about 6 weeks ago. Lady Patricia handled the initial coordination and provided all the necessary security clearances and background checks. Everything appeared to be properly documented. Anne felt a chill of recognition. Patricia had been the one managing the bureaucratic aspects of the catering arrangements, which would have given her the perfect cover for facilitating the conspiracy. Did you personally review Morrison's background? Anne asked. No. That level of detail was handled by Lady Patricia's office. Given her experience and the trust we place in her judgment, I approved the arrangements based on her recommendation. Anne was beginning to see how Patricia could have manipulated the system. By leveraging the trust placed in her by senior staff, she could have created false documentation and bypassed normal security procedures without raising suspicions. Anne found Patricia in the castle's administrative wing, ostensibly coordinating with law enforcement about the ongoing investigation. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s, meticulously organized and known for her absolute discretion in handling sensitive family matters. Patricia, Anne said, I'm trying to understand how this security breach could have occurred. You handled much of the coordination for the catering arrangements. Did you notice anything unusual about Morrison or his team? Patricia looked up from her notes with an expression of professional concern. I've been reviewing my files since the arrest, trying to identify where our procedures might have failed. The background checks all appeared legitimate, but clearly we were dealing with sophisticated deception. Anne decided to push harder. Were you in communication with Morrison's team beyond the normal coordination? Did they request any special information about the guest list or family schedules? For just a moment, Patricia hesitated before responding. It was a tiny pause, barely noticeable, but Anne caught it. They asked for the standard information about dietary restrictions and timing requirements, Patricia said. Nothing that seemed unusual at the time. Anne made a mental note of Patricia's slight hesitation. It could be nothing, or it could be the first crack in her cover story. I'd like to review your communication records with Morrison's team, Anne said. Can you provide me with copies of all correspondence? Of course, Patricia replied smoothly. Though, I should mention that I deleted much of the routine planning correspondence once the arrangements were finalized. It's standard practice to avoid cluttering our systems with operational details that are no longer relevant. This explanation was plausible, but Anne found the convenient destruction of evidence suspicious. She decided to set a trap. Actually, Patricia, there's something else I need to discuss with you. During our investigation, we discovered that someone had been passing detailed intelligence to the conspirators using an encrypted communication system. The technical analysis has traced this communication to specific devices within the castle. Anne watched Patricia's reaction carefully. For a split second, she saw something flicker in Patricia's eyes that looked like fear or calculation. How terrible, Patricia said. Do you have any leads about who might have been responsible? We're close to identifying the source, Anne said. The communication pattern analysis has narrowed it down to just a few possibilities. I expect we'll have definitive answers within the hour, Anne was bluffing about the timeline, but she wanted to create pressure that might force Patricia to make a mistake. "Well, I certainly hope you catch whoever was responsible," Patricia said. "The betrayal of trust is almost as shocking as the assassination attempt itself." Anne left Patricia's office and immediately contacted Hartford to request immediate surveillance of Lady Patricia. If she was crowned, she might try to destroy evidence or flee once she realized the investigation was closing in. 20 minutes later, Anne received an urgent message from Hartford. Patricia just accessed her office computer and appears to be deleting files. "We need to move now." Anne rushed back to Patricia's office with a team of security officers. They found Patricia at her computer, frantically trying to erase data from her hard drive. "Lady Patricia," Anne said firmly, "please step away from the computer."
Patricia looked up with the expression of someone who knew the game was over.
The mask of professional competence fell away, revealing cold calculation beneath. "How long have you known?" Patricia asked. "Palace, I suspected from the beginning that the conspiracy required inside help," Anne replied, "but I only confirmed your identity this afternoon." As security officers secured Patricia's computer and began arresting her, Anne felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She had prevented the assassination plot and identified the traitor, but the betrayal by someone so trusted cut deeply.
"Why?" Anne asked.
"You had everything here: respect, responsibility, a good life. Be arrested all for this." Patricia straightened with defiant pride. "Because the monarchy is a relic that's holding Britain back. The old guard, the traditional power structures, they're obstacles to progress. Someone needed to clear the way for new leadership. So you decided to commit mass murder? I decided to make necessary changes that weak politicians were afraid to make. Sometimes history requires bold action." Anne shook her head in disgust. "You nearly destroyed innocent people's lives in service of your twisted ideology. Margaret's wedding, dozens of government officials, members of my family, none of them deserved to die for your political fantasies." As Patricia was led away in handcuffs, Anne felt the weight of relief settling over her. The immediate threat had been neutralized. Morrison's poison plot had been stopped. The traitor within the royal family had been identified and arrested, but the work wasn't finished. The investigation would continue for months, as authorities unraveled the full extent of the conspiracy network. International connections would need to be traced. Additional conspirators would need to be identified and prosecuted. Anne returned to the reception hall where Margaret and her new husband were finally able to have a quiet moment together. The formal wedding reception had been ruined, but the marriage itself had survived the attack. "Aunt Anne," Margaret said, approaching with tears in her eyes, "I don't know how to thank you." "If you hadn't been watching, you don't need to thank me," Anne replied, embracing her niece. "Protecting family is what we do for each other." As the sun set over Windsor Castle, Anne reflected on the events of the day. An approach. A wedding that should have been a celebration had become the site of one of the most serious security breaches in royal history. But it had also demonstrated the strength and resilience of the family when faced with real danger. The investigation had revealed troubling vulnerabilities in royal security, but it had also shown that vigilance and courage could overcome even the most sophisticated threats. Anne had trusted her instincts, gathered evidence methodically, and acted decisively when action was required. Most importantly, she had protected the people she loved and preserved the institutions she had devoted her life to serving. The monarchy would continue, stronger and more secure because of the lessons learned from this crisis. As Anne walked through the castle's familiar corridors that night, she felt grateful for the years of experience that had prepared her for this challenge. She had faced the greatest test of her life and had not been found wanting. The conspiracy was over. Justice would be served, and the royal family would endure as it had for centuries, through crisis and triumph alike.